Hey there, welcome everybody to our CARES Act presentation featuring John Kreamer. I'd like to welcome everybody here. I'm Paul Thiel. I'm a director at La Jolla Institute, and I used to be the head of the Plan Giving Advisory Council. And as part of that, one of the things I used to talk a great deal about was the fact that giving to the La Jolla Institute was a disproportionate impact versus many of the other things you could give money to because of the size and the incredible impact of what goes on there. Really, a dollar goes to $1.50 or $2 versus some of the other places you might give. And it's only gotten more of that way in the past 6 months. With the pandemic, this is really a spectacular moment in time for the La Jolla Institute. Spectacular in the true meaning of the word, in that not all of it's for good reason. But the need really is urgent, and the changes in the laws have really made it possible for people to really leverage their money. So when I stepped away from the Plan Giving Advisory Council, I brought in a good friend of mine named John Kreamer to be a co-chair along with David Anderson. And John has spent the past 25 years as a philanthropic giving consultant, working with a number of institutions in town and out of town. But he also comes from a background of philanthropy from a family situation. He is president of his family's family office. His family was one of the founders of Southern California. Those of you who know the area might be familiar with Kreamer Boulevard in Orange County. That's John Kreamer's family. And that kind of legacy, of course, leads to a lot of philanthropic activities over time. And so John grew up with a lot of philanthropy in his family and adopted that, and has now leveraged it into helping other institutions like ours. And so what we're going to do today is hear from him as he talks about some of the advantages of the CARES Act in this particular moment in time because of some unique elements that are going to run out at the end of the year. John is also a trustee of a philanthropic organization himself, the Rosemary Kreamer Rate Foundation, and is a certified specialist in plan giving. So with that, I will turn it over to John and take it from there, and I will be back to handle questions at the end of the discussion. John, you want to take it away?
Yes. Thank you, Paul. So my pleasure to be here with all of you today. It's really a great honor, and it's a great organization. I was very pleased when Paul invited me to start helping, and I was already familiar with the organization due to some autoimmune illnesses within our own family. So today we're going to cover charitable planning in 2020, and it's how we can combine gifts to family, estate planning, and charitable giving within the current legislation that currently is existing today, and how that's impacting philanthropic planning. We're going to identify why 2020 is really a great time for charitable giving to La Jolla Institute. Paul's already touched on that because of the outside factors, but there's also internal factors that are affecting the donors to LGI. And we'll talk about tips for helping you and your heirs while supporting a great organization like LGI at the same time. So, inspiration to give, like good research, starts with some questions. We always see that in any good piece of research, there's got to be some inquisitiveness that starts off behind it. And with philanthropic giving, it's really helping donors to understand, is this the right time for me to make a major gift? Which of the assets are going to be best suited for that gift? Should I give now? Should I give next year? Or maybe is it better to do it in my will? And how can I give in the smartest, most tax advantaged way? And that's really what we're going to do a lot to cover today. Some of the strategies and ways to give wisely so that you can give more and do so in a manner that's not detrimental to your family. In fact, it may actually help your family. And most importantly, can I gift to charity and still provide for my family? Oftentimes people have already established pledges at an organization like JI, and they've been carrying out giving for a number of years. And is there an advantage to making those gifts sooner? 2020 is a unique situation where we have to answer that question differently than any time I've helped families do this in the last 25 years. We believe the time is now. It was a few months into this year where we realized that the stars had aligned. I'd seen this one other time in the last 25 years, and this is it. I think we'll look back on 2020 as a time not just for philanthropic giving, but as a time to take care of our families, to take care of ourselves and the communities around us. And it's a unique moment in history. And as we've seen, and those of you that are on the webinar today, you want to help. And we think that LGI is a unique organization that has a chance through its research to make a very meaningful impact in the world. LGI and the research can save countless lives. It's going to ease hardship for many that are really in stressful situations today and whose health is impacted. But most importantly, the efforts that's being made currently around coronavirus will really help the world economy and shape our future, not only as a community, but as a planet. And there's a lot of current opportunities to align with LGI's vision of life without disease. And that's really bringing to bear all of LGI's resources and researchers, the current ongoing research that's done in many areas around immunology and cancer research, but also the current work that's really capturing a lot of attention around infectious diseases and treatments and vaccines. So 2020 is really a once in a generation opportunity as well. So think about all those impacts in the charitable world and LGI. And I can tell you as a professional that helps families do estate and gift planning, that 2020 is a unique opportunity as well for families to do their planning, just as impactful and just as meaningful as the philanthropic world. This CARES Act is really what's the catalyst or the seed behind a lot of the discussion points we'll have in today's presentation. It's never been more beneficial to gift cash to a charity. And there's really only a few months left in the year to receive the maximum benefit. It's always good to give. It's just more advantageous in 2020 than in any time I've seen in the past. So why is this happening? So on the estate planning side, 2020 is really a perfect storm for gifting to family. And I'm going to cover a number of these points. Anyone that's listening today, you'll be getting this presentation from Chris Lee's office here in the coming days. So you don't have to worry about taking notes of what's on the slides. If it prompts a question or a thought, then by all means write that down. And we're going to be taking questions at the end, so you can feel free to come back and ask those further on in the conversation. But during times like we've had in 2020, when securities and business values are depressed, it's a great time for individuals to give their assets to family members, not to charity, but to transfer them to families. So right this part of the presentation, I'm talking about how we can take care and provide for our families, so that knowing that we ourselves and our spouses are cared for, that our children and grandchildren are cared for, then we can have an open canvas to start planning what we can do for the charities that are near and dear to our hearts. We've had a lot of volatility in the markets, in the stock markets, the economic markets during 2020, and this creates a larger discount on assets and business valuations and minority interests that we can then transfer to family members at lower cost. Some of the really most exciting areas are around interest rates. As we know, they're all low, and that's impactful to us if we're living on income from our investments. But if we're trying to gift those investments to family members, having the interest rates be as low as possible is very favorable. The AFR rates are used for intra-family loans, and right now you could loan millions and millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to family members and have a loan that lasts for 30 years and have it unsecured and only have to charge them a little over 1.1% interest. So as you can imagine, that's a way to transfer a lot of value to family members by acting as their bank. And there's techniques like this that are available today that make it very, very easy for family members to transfer assets to children and grandchildren. And by doing that, now be in a position where you can gift and support charity. There's also a significant lifetime gift tax exclusion of $11.5 million that's available to any individual to give to whoever they want, free of gift tax. And if they haven't done it during life, if they're to pass away, then they can leave it free of estate tax from their estate. This isn't going to be around forever. It's due to sunset in 2025 and will fall back to roughly half that amount, or $5.5 million. And we are suggesting to our clients that they go ahead and make those transfers either outright to family members or in trust for their benefit. And again, planning for their future, 2020 is a great time to do that. There's a lot of concern that taxes of all types are going to increase in the future. So 2020 is a good time to explore this and potentially act upon it. And some of these estate planning opportunities are around outright gifts, family loans, as I mentioned. There's different types of trusts, sales to family members of business assets or interest in real estate properties. And there's also a technique through charitable lead trust that we'll discuss today. We think these conditions are only going to endure for a short time. And after 2020, it's really anyone's guess what's going to happen. We will provide you a helpful tool for estate planning that you can use with your own family members, your advisors, and we'll get that to you after the presentation. But the key point of this part was really to help you understand that once you've planned for your family, then you can plan for charity. So we're going to talk today about some of the legislation and the tax code changes that are causing this increase in impact that you can make through philanthropy. And there was really two key pieces of legislation in the last 8 months. One is the Stretch IRA. And that one the Stretch IRA had been set up where individuals who had large IRAs could leave them to their children or grandchildren over their lifetimes. This recent legislation that passed just at the end of December means that when you leave an IRA to a family member, a child or grandchildren that's more than 10 years younger than you, which they always are, you're going to have to cause them to take all of that income within 10 years. So whereas in the past you thought you could spread it out over their lifetime, now you have to count on this young person receiving all of the funds within 10 years. And that's really caused a change to the way people look at their retirement plans as a wealth transfer vehicle. And it's increased the incentive for using these assets instead as charitable giving vehicles through what's called a qualified charitable distribution from an IRA. And I'll talk about that later today. But it's also causing people to look at their IRAs and consider giving them to charity outright at the end of their lifetimes through a testamentary gift, or naming a CRT as a beneficiary of an IRA. That technique's a little more lengthy to explain. I'll send some information in the slides that come afterwards, but it can also be a good technique for certain families. But the key here is to remember that for a philanthropic individual, charity is the most efficient beneficiary for your IRA. The CARES Act was passed at the end of March. And we all know it because they talked about things like PPE and emergency loans. And we all know and have heard the number of $2.2 trillion that was going to come to help those that were unemployed. What hasn't been discussed in the rush to get this legislation out is some of the lesser known provisions that are really built around philanthropy, encouraging giving, and that's what I'll talk about right here. In 2020, for the first time that I have ever seen, you can deduct 100% of a cash gift in the same year as the gift against your adjusted gross income. It's usually at a level of 50 to 60%. So suddenly they're saying you can write off almost twice of what you normally can. This only applies to operating public charities like LJI. It does not count to your private foundation or to a donor-advised fund. You can also make cash gifts from partnerships and S corporations. And for corporations, they've increased the amount you can give from 10% of annual income at the corporate level to 25%. So if you think about that, that's a huge increase. And again, these provisions that were put into the CARES Act, which haven't been talked about, are really meant to encourage giving. But there's also some other interesting provisions when you dig deeper in this hundreds of pages of legislation. There's a provision that's going to provide over $135 billion in tax refunds to high net worth business owners around what are called net operating loss carrybacks. This may not apply to everyone on the phone call today, but on the chance it's relevant to anyone, we wanted to mention it. So net operating loss carrybacks can now be allowed to go back 5 years in time for any net operating losses that are incurred from 2018 to 2020. Your losses can offset 100% of the income from any of the prior 5 years. And this is creating significant immediate tax refunds, as I said, to the tune of about $135 billion. So if you haven't looked into this, there are large refunds that are being given out. And the idea behind that, I'd like to believe, not being too cynical, is that it was really intended so that these large entities could make gifts at a time when the need was very great. What's interesting is that when an individual gives a donation from one of these net operating losses, they create another tax deduction and more tax savings that in themselves create benefits. So we see the CARES Act as really creating the ability to combine our family planning, family estate planning with creating a charitable benefit. That these cash gifts that are immediately deductible create new planning opportunities. That enables us to provide for family and take care of charity at the same time. Donors often make gifts of appreciated assets, and when they do, these deductions are limited to 30% of your adjusted gross income. Any gift deduction that you can't use that year, you can carry forward for 5 more years, but it can limit gifts you make in the future because you're always wanting to use the deductions you've already generated. In 2020, the tax legislation encourages us to make large gifts and encourages us to use the deductions quickly so we're in position to gift again. And again, this is very novel. This is not typically done. And to optimize the opportunity to use these all cash gifts, we really suggest that you work with your key advisors, your tax, your legal advisors, and start this planning process now. Because to free up cash when you're fully invested can require your advisor's input. And although they may not be getting too many questions thus far year to date on this specific item, they are busy, and it is going to get even busier towards year end as the election approaches. When the market was very volatile a few months ago, many wealth advisors, for example, helped their clients by harvesting tax losses and reinvesting the proceeds in similar assets almost immediately. And what this did is it gave investors a step up in basis. So if they were to sell stock, they're able to create cash without any capital gains. And it's a technique that many use to help their clients during volatile times, but it can also position them well for making large cash gifts this year. And we'll explain in the coming slides why it's good to have that flexibility. These net operating losses, when we pair them with these cash gifts, it can double the write-off. So again, a very advantageous year for people to do their giving because they can double the benefit to themselves of that giving. And we think it's an ideal time to combine the net operating losses and cash gifting with what are called Roth IRA conversions. And we'll cover that today as well. So all in all, 2020 is a year to consider selling some of the high basis assets, things like real estate, annuities, art, etc., and gifting the proceeds after tax. Sometimes, and CARES Act has really given us a chance to look at it, it can be more advantageous to gift cash than to give appreciated assets. I saw this line quoted in one of the LGI donor newsletters, and it said, private philanthropy is the most effective way to rapidly propel COVID-19 research forward. It's an exciting time, it's a scary time, and I know LGI has so much of its support through the traditional grant-making process, oftentimes through government entities or the NIH, that the ability to receive grants quickly and effectively through private philanthropy is extremely important to be able to pivot and move research in the direction it needs to move quickly. I believe LGI and its researchers have the resources, they have the intellect, they have the teams to do the work. They just sometimes need the philanthropy to fund it. So a question oftentimes that comes up is, which are the best assets to give? We sometimes think people should look to low or non-income producing assets like real estate or short-term bonds, CDs, etc., that are not going to impact your quality of life by the giving you do. Oftentimes now in 2020, we're also considering high basis assets like stock that's had this loss harvesting done already, annuities and life insurance policies that are no longer needed, art, and oftentimes inherited assets that already have a step up in basis. People ask, is there anywhere else that I can come up with money for these cash gifts? And as we said, corporations and other entities sometimes sit with very large amounts of cash or retained earnings inside of them. And the tax legislation this year is giving companies a chance to free up that money and make it available, not for distributions, but for philanthropy. And that's a very tax advantaged step for a business owner to be able to do their philanthropic gifting from their corporation rather than having to do it out of their personal assets. There's also these significant tax refunds that can come from these net operating loss write-offs, as well as tax savings from charitable deductions themselves. As you get tax savings. If you gift those tax savings, they create even more tax savings. And finally, many of the people we work with and the donors to LGI have their own private foundations and have donor advised funds. Those existing funds that are already in those entities will not create new deductions, but it can be a source of funding for donations that will enable great work to happen at this time. So, in this section of the presentation, I'm going to cover some of the planning opportunities available. And again, if you have questions, please write them down and we'll come back and answer them in the balance at the end of the presentation. So, charitable lead trust. These are one of the least practiced and least utilized charitable gift vehicles. Like the charitable remainder trust, they've been around for decades. But there's a unique confluence of factors that need to fall into place for them to work well. And the primary one is low interest rates. So once every generation, once every decade, there's a period when interest rates are extremely low, and it increases the popularity of this vehicle tremendously. What a charitable lead trust does is it creates an annual payment to charity per a fixed schedule, much like a pledge. Money's put into the trust, distributions are paid out of it each year to charity, and when the trust term is over, the period of years, any remaining assets are distributed to the beneficiaries or a trust for the benefit of the family. And the Jackie Onassis and the Walton family use this technique. The Walton family actually set up 17 different clats as a way that they were able to transfer billions of dollars, but also have a tremendous impact on their communities through their philanthropic giving. The tax angle on how this works is this is called a split interest gift. There's really two parts to it. There's a present value of the remainder, which is going to go to family, and that's a taxable gift. There's a present value of the income stream that's going to charity, and that creates an income tax charitable deduction. What's unique with charitable lead trusts is you get to determine when you want to take that deduction. If you need a big write-off this year, you can take it up front. If you'd prefer to stretch it out over the lifetime of the trust, you can do it that way. But it gives you, the donor, the control on that item. The assets in the clat only need to exceed whatever interest rate is assumed at the time, and the benefit will go to family tax-free. So currently, the anticipated return of an investment in trust is only 0.4% because of the low interest rate environment. So if your assets actually return 5 or 7 or 10%, all of that growth above 0.4% will pass to family members, not just in the next year, but if you set the CLAD up for 10 or 20 years or longer, that will all pass to your family tax-free. So it's a wonderful technique for taking care of charity today through these annual gifts, but also getting the benefit to charity. And why is it so important to look at this in 2020? Well, as we said, assets have gone down in value because of the volatile markets, as well as business valuations. So it's a great time to fund the trust. It looks like a small value, but it's still going to create a lot of value for charity. And because the interest rates are so low, the assumption of how much these assets are going to grow is, I believe, artificially low. And any appreciation in excess of that is going to flow to the heirs. So we think this is a truly unique way to benefit charity and benefit your family simultaneously. Another great way to do this is through what's called Roth IRA conversions. And as we all know, our retirement plans, our IRAs, and our 401k can be very important for our retirements. But what's unique is for the wealthier families, they oftentimes aren't living off their retirement plans because the taxes are so high on them. And there's a provision that everyone's pretty aware of, that you can convert a traditional IRA, which is taxable when you take the money out, to a Roth IRA. You only have one catch, and that is you have to pay ordinary income at the time that you convert the IRA, which is what is usually the impediment to anyone doing one of these conversions. But if you had a large write-off, if you had a way to reduce your income this year, whether it was through net operating losses or it was through a large charitable gift, then you could combine that and do a very large Roth conversions. Once you do the Roth conversion, whatever money is in your IRA from that point forward will not be subject to income tax during your lifetime, your spouse's lifetime, and any heirs you leave it to for an additional 10 years. The Roth is still going to be subject to estate tax, but it's now a very income tax efficient asset for the heirs. And we think that if you combine a charitable gift that you wanted to do along with the Roth IRA conversion, you're going to mitigate both current and future income taxes. So you're really planning for today, but planning for your children or grandchildren's future as well. But this is an important asset because this one will benefit you during your lifetime, and that you'll have a tax-free retirement bucket to look at. So as we said, the qualifying cash gift is going to qualify for a tax deduction at 100% of your adjusted gross income. And again, so if you have a large cash gift, you can have high adjusted gross income. And these gifts can be structured to offset each other, so the tax owed on the Roth conversion is exactly the size of the charitable gift you make this year. The larger gift you care to make, the larger the Roth conversion that can be made. This is an ideal way, again, we believe, to benefit charity and create some tax-free income, both for yourself and your family members. We had an example here of how impactful this can be. In this example, the donor had a $2 million bequest they wanted to make through their will. They also planned to give their grandson, who's age 30, a $2 million IRA. But because of this Secure Act, suddenly he can't stretch it out over his lifetime. It has to all be used and distributed within 10 years. So looking at that example, if it grew at 7.2% for 10 years, it'd be worth $4 million, but after tax, it would only net the grandson $2 million. And what we looked at is with the Roth conversion is we suggest to the donor, if you're going to leave $2 million in your will, consider giving that now. Because if you give it now, it creates a $2 million deduction, which allows you to convert that Roth now and make that tax-free forever, or as long as it's going to be around. And so at the end of the same 10 years, because there's no tax, you would have twice as much inside the Roth IRA as you would in a traditional IRA. And if your grandson was expedient and didn't spend the money right away and did as you hoped he would and saved it for retirement when he was age 70, it would now have grown 16 million instead of 8 million. So that can be the impact of planning you do today can help your children, help your grandchildren really for decades to come. And this example is an easy one because that cash gift was something the donor was planning on doing anyway in his will. The question really becomes, can he afford to do that today? Can he afford to combine a cash gift and do a Roth conversion as 2020? And as we said earlier, this is why you want to talk to your advisors and make sure that they're helping you with this planning. One of the other elements that we're real excited about is what we call the compound gift. This is a real simple concept, but it's one of those things that it's so simple sometimes you got to stop and think about it. But we've helped donors for close to 25 years giving to charity, and we're oftentimes talking to them about what they do with the tax savings. And it's something that people don't think about when they're making a gift. They said, I believe in this organization. I want to give them $100,000 or $1 million or $10 million to make their mission, their projects, or their research viable and happen today. And we say, well, what do you want to do with the rest of the gift? And they say, what do you mean? So, well, you're going to be getting a large tax benefit out of this gift. And we've successfully been able to encourage people to gift the tax savings from their gift. So the first gift creates the tax benefit and the tax savings, they gift that, and that creates another tax savings and they gift that. And in a 50% tax bracket state like California, a $2 million gift actually becomes a $4 million gift if you're willing to gift the tax savings away. And it's a real simple concept. If you stop doing that, meaning if you just put those tax savings in your pocket, the compounding stops. So it's this need to continue the process that helps you maximize the gifting. And we think this works best. And what we oftentimes help clients with are assets they no longer need. It might be a piece of real estate, a second, a third, a fourth home, a vacation property that family's not really using. It can be an insurance or an annuity portfolio. It can be a stock position that's very concentrated that they haven't traded for years because of the appreciation in it and the concern about paying capital gains. So these type of assets, when freed up this way, kind of create a windfall tax savings, and these tax savings can ideally be gifted. And again, this is really important to work with your advisors on this. As the tax brackets increase, the value of the deduction is going to increase as well. And so sometimes we hear advisors say, you may want to hold off giving, you might be in a higher tax bracket in the future, but we really don't see that being an issue because tax deductions, as you get into higher tax brackets, really increase the ability to do this compound gifting. And I'll give you an example here. We had a donor in December that we worked with, and they did a large gift. And the first gift was funding a charitable organization. I use an example here of LJI. The research was being done. And then they wanted to use the tax savings they were generating to create an endowment at that charity. So they'll make their first gift. They're going to pledge the tax savings from that gift, as well as any future compounding tax savings that occur. And each year the charity receives those funds and they puts them in the endowment. There's no out-of-pocket cost. Now, I realize that if that donor had kept those tax savings, he could have invested them, he could have spent them. But they'll always be worth more money to the charity because of the compounding that takes place. Those tax savings will build an endowment, and that will just grow over time. We design these to be flexible, so if the tax law or the donor's adjusted gross income changes, it won't impact them negatively. Only the actual tax savings are gifted to the charity, nothing out of pocket when we set these up. Here's an example from this donor in December of 2019. They made a gift of appreciated assets. This example here is of a cash gift. We compared the two. On their appreciated gift, it would have taken them 6 years to use about 85% of their deductions. They wouldn't have been able to use all of them, because when you give appreciated assets, you can only write it off against 30% of adjusted gross income. We plug the same numbers into an all cash gift as a model. If they had been able to do a cash gift, unfortunately they couldn't. They were only able to do an appreciated asset gift, and it was a phenomenal gift for both them and the charity. But what we find with the cash gift, they can write off the same amount in 3 years that they could in 6. And they end up being able to give an extra $250,000 more to charity and to give it sooner. So that's the real power of this new legislation. And that's the power of the cash gifts and the ability to write them off at 100% of adjusted gross income. I provided this spreadsheet just so that you know that this kind of analysis can easily be done. Now that this is set up, our office can run them, but also your advisors can do these types of calculations for you. And the key was just to help you understand how advantageous. So if there's anything that I can leave you with today, again, not every idea is going to be acceptable or beneficial to every donor, but this is one that's pretty easy. My dad was a farmer, a very successful one. He was a good investor, and he was also very philanthropically minded. He saved into an IRA. He was very excited when he was young and he was working. He loved the idea of saving tax deferred and not paying taxes. But when it came time to taking his first required minimum distributions, he fought and he screamed and he just didn't want to do it. Well, along came this ability to take what's called a qualified charitable distribution from an IRA. So instead of taking the money out yourself, you direct it instead to go to a charity. This satisfies your required minimum distribution. It doesn't add to your adjusted gross income. You don't get a deduction for it, but it doesn't count as income either. So it's tax neutral to you, and it actually helps save you money to give money from the IRA than to take money out of the IRA, or oftentimes even liquidating other assets and making gifts from them. So please keep this in mind. You can do up to $100,000 per person per IRA. So if both spouses have IRAs, the couple together can give up to $200,000 a year. There's a few small techniques. You just got to make sure you don't take the money yourself and give it to charity. You merely ask your wealth advisor to direct the money to the charity directly. You cannot make these types of gifts to private foundations or donor advised funds. So again, LJI is fortunate. They're a qualifying charity for these types of distributions. And you'll get an acknowledgement at the end of the year that you provide your CPA. And here's an example of how they can work. So this is a couple, age 70 and a half, which is the minimum age you have to be before you can utilize these. Each of them have a large IRA. They're going to use a portion of that IRA to endow gifts. 100,000 goes from each plan in annual gifts. They can choose it to be used currently for research or to build an endowment. If it is endowed, 5% of it's paid out annually to fund current research. And in this example, if you look down at the last bullet, it says over 25 years, 5 million is gifted into the endowment. At 5% endowment payout, 2.25 million is distributed for research. But important to note is that there's a $5 million endowment now permanently in place at LGI or a similar charity. That's $250,000 a year that will be received in perpetuity that can be used for research. So this is a very powerful way to use an IRA. And if the numbers seem large to you, really 100,000 can be safely gifted from a $2 million IRA every year. And although there's not a lot of people with, IRAs in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, there's a lot of IRAs out there that are $1 million, $2 million or more. So keep that in mind. as a great technique. As estate planners, as wealth transfer planners that are helping families and family offices and business owners, we think that the ability to transfer wealth and to do estate planning has never been easier. Really, the question for a lot of our clients isn't becoming how can I get to the kids? It's a question of how much is enough or how much is too much for my kids. And we also see philanthropy becoming more important as wealth is created at younger and younger ages, both through successful technology and innovative industry, but also through inheritance. And because of that, families are starting to see that one of the results of the good planning that's been done is they want to encourage their children to become philanthropic themselves at younger ages. And we're seeing the younger generation gifting for impact, seeking current results from their giving. And because of that, we're seeing their parents reposition balance sheets in a way to kind of take that into consideration. The last couple slides we will send out to you have some tips for speaking to your advisors that we think will be helpful and getting prepared for a meeting with your advisors, things to think through. We won't cover that today because it's not applicable to everybody, but for those of you that want some tips, they're there. And then I've also put together a summary along with that URL that I mentioned earlier that will give you some background information to take a look at and maybe some topics to remember or that you can speak to your advisors about. So for that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll turn it back to Paul for Q&A.
Great, thanks, John. Before we get to Q&A, though, Mitch Cronenberg, who's the CEO and the Chief Scientific Officer of La Jolla Institute, would like to say a couple words in support. Mitch?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think there were going to be some slides shown. Is that correct? Let's see. Yes. Okay. Well, there we are. Okay. I just wanted to say a few words about La Jolla Institute for Immunology, and I'm sure those of you listening know something about us. We've been around for about 32 years now, have almost 500 employees, and have 21 independent laboratories, meaning labs choose the topic that they work on as long as it's immunology. And our budget has grown recently through private giving, particularly related to COVID-19, and it's about $75 million. So recently, philanthropy has made the impact that was mentioned earlier by Paul and by John that allowed us to start research on the pandemic very rapidly. Next slide, please. So our mission is to engage in a world-class biomedical research program with a focus on the immune system so that we can make outstanding discoveries and important contributions to the betterment of human health. Next, please. So the amazing thing about immunology is it's your own doctor, if you will, and the immune system is connected to so many diseases and conditions. So we've decided to divide our research labs, and these are the lab heads, into 3 disease research areas. And one is infectious disease and vaccines, which is now getting so much attention. But we shouldn't forget autoimmunity and inflammation. These diseases include diabetes, heart disease, which is inflammatory, rheumatoid arthritis, and many others. And finally, there's cancer. And the immune system is really a new weapon for fighting cancer, and it's probably the best one that we have. Less toxic than some of the chemical and radiation treatments. Immune therapies have really come to the fore. Next, please. So as mentioned, we were able to pivot, if you will, and to quickly orient a good part of our research effort. And these are the heads of the labs. Some of these individuals have given webinars, which many of you have heard. And these individuals are studying the response to SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. And they've made some amazing findings about pre-existing immune memory in some people, the fact that even mild cases can stimulate responses, and even looking at the rapid evolution of the virus. Really, really important work that is guiding all these vaccine trials and all this other effort around the world. Next one, please. Well, this we're very proud of. So this is somebody that I'm sure all of you know. He's on television quite a lot. He's Dr. Tony Fauci, whom I know. And he's been the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease for some 36 years or so, and is often described as our top infectious disease expert. During a recent testimony in Congress, when a congressman asked Tony Fauci about T-cell research, and it was amazing to my ears to hear a congressman talking about T-cells, an important cell in the immune system, but not a typical topic for a congressman. Tony held up this paper from our recent work that was published and said, this is the kind of work that we need to do, and we need more of this work. So I couldn't think of a more fulsome and important endorsement from what many are calling our nation's top infectious disease expert. Thank you, Tony. I think that's the last slide, Chris, correct? Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I want to say is that we really are very, very grateful to all of our donors. They have accelerated our research and made it possible, and make it possible every year, every month, for us to advance. And we have a lot of plans. We want to get new equipment. It has a fancy name called a mass spectrometer. We want to enlarge our clinical core so we can collect blood from more patients safely, which is very important now because we have to sanitize after every patient. So we can collect and process the blood. And there are other initiatives that we're planning. You know, I've been the president of the Institute for a long time, but we're not resting on our laurels by any means. We're at the very early stages of planning an initiative to study the role of gender in the immune response. You know, males and females are different. Well, their immune responses are really quite different. And this is an understudied area. There are other things, other new technologies that we're very much interested in. Maybe I've spoken for a little too long, but I'd like to give Steve Wilson, who's my closest partner at the Institute for Work. He's our Executive VP and COO. Introduce him and give him a chance to say a few words.
Thanks, Mitch. What I can share with the group quickly is that philanthropic giving and the funds that come in are quite different than those that you compete through grant mechanisms. The boldness and the direct inquiry into the problem at the moment is possible with philanthropic gifts and funds that are part of institutional funds like endowment. Grants are going to follow the needs of the federal government or other agencies, and they're slow. They focus more on knowledge gained over time, and big programs is good. But in order to respond to a crisis like COVID-19, without philanthropic funds and the discretion to deploy those immediately, there's no way we could have made the kind of impact that you're seeing now. And this is going to continue to happen, not only with COVID-19, but in all of our research areas, if we're able to just be very bold and take risks that can translate into big discoveries, then it becomes self-feeding. It's a virtuous cycle where the speed at which we can understand things gains more attention and our ability to do the research faster. And so it's catalytic. I really hope that folks considering this think about the funds as not pure dollar-to-dollar impact, but really force multipliers. And philanthropic funds are just incredibly powerful here at the Institute.
Great, thanks, Mitch and Steve. So quickly, before we get to Q&A, I wanted to mention, in addition to Dr. Fauci's CNN, C-SPAN appearance a second ago, the the media has been all over LJ in a variety of ways, almost on a daily basis. One of the more interesting ones I've come across ran in the Atlantic magazine last week, where Dr. Shane Crotty was the first person quoted in a very well done explanatory piece for lay people, and then appeared throughout the piece. So we've been all over the news, which is outstanding. Okay, we've got a build up of a few questions here. One of them for John. If you donate from your IRA as part of your minimum required withdrawal, is that deductible under the CARES Act?
That's a great question, Nancy, that yes, you can. You're going to be able to count whatever you give as a gift towards your minimum required distribution. So if somebody's minimum required is $100 and they gave $50 to a charity, it would reduce your required minimum distribution by that amount. You can also give more than your required minimum distribution. As I said, you can go all the way up to a ceiling of $100,000 per year per IRA. So that was a great question. Thank you. Very simple, and that's an easy one to help with. The next question is
combining a Roth IRA conversion with a cash gift to LGI, and you have offsetting increases and decreases in AGI. Great plan. But what about the AMT? Does the offset work for that? Or are you going to get caught in the alternative minimum tax?
I do not have the answer to that question, but I would be glad to do some research. And I think, as you said, it may depend on your particular circumstances, but I can also do some homework as well. I don't have a quick and easy answer, but what's fortunate is I'll give a little plug. We have a tremendous plan giving advisory committee, which is made up of tax specialists, accountants, tax attorneys, that I can go to and get an answer to that question quickly and easily for you.
Okay, great. Another one. I started hearing about bunching donations last year when the tax law changed. Is that a good strategy? Is that a good idea for 2020 and the CARES Act adjustments?
I think it is. I think it's really important to take a look at. We've kind of got some offsetting factors. You've got this ability to bunch your gifts this year and receive a lot of the tax benefit of that because of this ability to write them off at a high percentage of your adjusted gross income. Some people are speculating on what the future holds. Will we have a time of higher income tax brackets? Should I wait till next year to make my gift? And that's one of the things that you'll see on that advisor page on tips on talking to your advisor is we think oftentimes delaying and kind of going through tax analysis may get you a little more of a benefit, but it may be a little less. It's important to know the pluses and minuses, but it's also important to quantify them. So if you're getting a small benefit one year to the next, it's worth considering. But if your impetus and your motivation is to give now and the stars are aligned for you to make a gift, then I think you'll never look back and wish you'd waited. I think sometimes I see people looking back and wishing they'd done something sooner once they see the importance of what they've done.
I own my own company. Should I consider increasing my corporate giving to augment my personal giving strategy?
Yes, it depends on the type of company, but if you have what's called a C Corp, where you have to pay a tax on distribution from the company to get the dollars that you then gift to charity, it's better to give those dollars directly from the business. It can increase the amount of the gifting. And it also keeps you in a lower AGI, so you're in lower tax brackets going forward. Much like the benefit of the qualified charitable distributions keep you at a lower AGI and a lower tax bracket yourself.
Okay, another one. I typically give at the end of the year. Is there any reason that I need to worry about this now that it's the middle of August? Why am I doing this today?
You know, you don't have to do it today. It's just the question of, is it fun for you to give it today? You know, sometimes I think we look at giving as something that's heavy, something that you're doing almost out of obligation, when instead, I think if you listen to any one of those great presentations that the great speakers from LGI have given this year, you're inspired to give, you want to give, you want to give sooner. And I think that's why I gave you some tips talking to your advisors. If you want this to happen and you want to have it happen now, then ask your advisor to help you make it happen now, because it's a wonderful time to give. As Mitch said, if the gifts come now, they can do the work now. If they have to wait 4 months or 4 years, they got to postpone doing the work until a later time.
Yeah, thanks, John. Any other questions? Please feed them into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping up shortly. But the last point I wanted to comment on briefly is that one of the advantages of giving now while you're around instead of in a testamentary fashion is that you can keep an eye on Steve and Mitch and the rest of us to make sure we do a good job with your money, rather than waiting until it's till you're past your expiration date, so to speak.
Right.
It would be great, Paul. We're happy, and if we have to wear masks, that's fine.
So I'm going to ask Steve and Mitch for any closing comments. In advance of that, just something that probably goes without saying to this group, but the exemption right now, which means the amount of money you don't pay estate taxes on, is around is a little over $23 million. I've long held for my business that if you know that and you have any planning capabilities at all, you can get 2 to 3x that amount. And so I think that speaks well for itself and probably gives a lot of people on this call some capacity to back the good work that Steve, Mitch, and the other hundreds of LJI employees are doing in this time of crisis. So Steve and Mitch, do you want to wrap us up?
Steve, go ahead, then I'll.
Sure. Yeah. So the current COVID challenge has actually opened our eyes to an exciting new speed at which we can respond to things. And Mitch mentioned it a little bit, but we're trying very hard to build what's called a clinical core into a high performance unit where we collect samples from human patients, be they in clinical trials or in cohorts we put together. It's working. It's working really well. And we've actually gotten to the point that if we can't build that clinical core, we can't do research that would otherwise be funded by grants. And so the chance to kind of turn the corner and really turn our program into an extraordinarily powerful clinical research unit inside a world-class basic Immunology Institute, there's never been a better time. We just have tremendous opportunity. It's all coming together, and we need the help out of the gate.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And before I add anything, I really want to thank John for explicating how we can plan for the future. It's not quite as complicated as immunology, but it's not so simple. And your explanation was very lucid. So thank you, John. Thank you, Paul, for moderating and for everything you do for the Institute. Yeah, Steve's absolutely right. Building the clinical core will allow us to expand our studies of people who have gotten COVID-19 vaccines, which is what we're going to do. We're going to see how long their immunity lasts. But I just want to end by saying one more thing, and it's the following. About a year ago, when we asked our board members to identify with one of the disease areas, very few of them were interested in infectious disease. Cancer and autoimmunity was where most of the people went. And I can, in another year, if we're really highly successful, it's maybe optimistic, there'll be a vaccine. People may forget about COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 until the next pandemic, whenever that may occur. But there's still cancer and there's still debilitating inflammation and autoimmunity. Immunology the immune system is one system. And I can assure you that in studying infection, we're also studying cancer because it's all a matter of when the immune system is quiet and when it knows when to respond. And the same is true for, if we consider autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, very much related. In fact, a lot of the people who are very sick from COVID-19 are sick because they're making too much of an immune response and they're causing acute respiratory distress syndrome or cytokine storm, too much immunity, the wrong kind of immunity. So blocking that is the same way we treat rheumatoid arthritis if we're successful. So we're in this for the long run. The immune system is going to point us in the direction of life without disease. We're fighting COVID-19 intensively now, but there's so much work to do. So I hope a lot of you listening will think of ways that you can help us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Steve. And especially thanks, John and Chris Lee and his whole team behind the scenes. So with that, we'll sign off. Everybody on this, I think we'll get a copy of the presentation John left. But until then, have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.